machines at half or a third of the cost. Secondly, the same has to do with NAFTA. Secondly, in terms of the environment, we need the same environmental standards everywhere. Why? Because if you have a plant here in Iowa and they make a toxic byproduct, they have to pay a lot of money to get rid of that properly, and they should, because we don't want the stuff going in the rivers. But if you take that plant to China, they can dump the stuff in the river. That means whatever they pay, we are essentially giving them a reason to move their plant. You've got to have the same environmental standards. You've got to have the same labor standards. If you do that, then trade works. And I want trade to work. I want to create middle classes in other countries. I want to stop the hemorrhaging of our jobs. It even reduces illegal immigration, because people don't leave their home countries because they hate their country. They leave because they can't make a living elsewhere. And why? Because there's no such thing as a middle class in a lot of those countries, because they don't have the same labor laws that we do, and they ought to. There's a gentleman over here who I cut off because I didn't realize that you had the mic.
Okay. As a retail pharmacist, I think I have a very simple solution to getting people over 65 affordable drugs. There is a federal law prohibiting pharmacies in the United States from buying drugs in a wholesaler in Canada. If we take away that law, it will cost the government nothing, it will cost the taxpayer nothing, and we can do it by the end of the month, and we can provide affordable drugs for people over 65.
That's a great... Did everybody hear that? Let me repeat it. The retail pharmacists suggest that we allow importation at the wholesale level of drugs from Canada. Now, if NAFTA is so great for everybody else, for shoes and automobiles and what else, how come we can't get our drugs from Canada? Don't give me this, the drug companies say it's unsafe up there. You think the Canadians don't care about their children the same way Americans care about theirs? Nonsense. This is the deal with drug companies. They have special laws to protect themselves in ways that nobody else does. They have patent law for the drug companies that doesn't apply to anybody else. You can extend your patent indefinitely if you're a drug company. They have special laws that prevent states from competing, causing them to compete with each other. They have special laws that prevent importation of drugs from other countries, even though those laws don't apply to anybody else. All we have to do is undo the special regulations that protect the drug companies from competing with each other. I'll give you some medical advice, which is worth what you pay for it, since I haven't practiced for 12 years. Everybody know the little purple pill. I don't mean Viagra. I mean Nexium, right? The little purple pill. That pill is a metabolite of what... if you take Prilosec, which is a drug that does the same thing, it's going off patent, into your stomach, it turns into Nexium. The only reason that Nexium exists is so that drug companies can extend their 17-year patent and charge you $140 for the same thing that you could pay. What's Prilosec going to go for, $35 when they get two companies making it? Right. So anyway, the bottom line is, though, this stuff is all gamed, but you have never seen a drug ad with a price on it. You have never seen a car ad that didn't have a price on it or an interest rate on it. Why? Because car companies compete on price, drug companies don't. All we got to do is take all those protectionist legislation and drug laws away, so the drug companies compete the same as everybody else, and so you can get them at the cheapest price. And what you said is important. We should not undermine our local small-town pharmacists by only allowing it for individuals, which is what the Congress is doing now. We ought to let you buy those drugs wholesale so you don't have to go out of business and you don't have to go on the computer or take a bus trip 300 miles to Canada. Finally.
I think the room must be stacked with pharmacists. I'm also a pharmacist. But my question is very concerned about the...
I'm glad to see so many Democratic pharmacists out here.
How stem cell research has really been put at a hold.
My brother has a diabetic son who's 10 years old. He got diabetes when he was about 5. He was an independent, leaning a little Republican because he's a business person. He will never vote for a Republican again because of what George Bush has done, taking the hope away from my 10-year-old nephew that he's going to get better because this president used ideological reasons to ban a medical practice. Politicians have no business deciding whether we're going to have stem cell research or not. That ought to be left to doctors and scientists.
Congratulations on being on Newsweek and Time at the same time. Now that's a slam bang.
Thank you.
I run with the help of some very good people, run a homeless place in Spirit Lake, and have for 11 years. And as the time has passed, the need increases and the money decreases. And we will go out of business this year because we were cut in half. Do you think there's any way to hang on? And is there hope, I guess is what I'm saying.
Is there hope for the homeless, basically? Is that what you
For
said?
helping the homeless.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, there is. Get a new president in 2004. That's the only hope. Let me tell you what we should do about the homelessness in this country. A lot of it is what we've done in our state, but there's more to be done. There are two categories of homeless, basically. One are families and individuals who are reasonably healthy and who are one paycheck away from disaster. The paycheck gets lost, the family splits up, some catastrophe happens, and they're out on the street. That's not hard to stop. We have a program in our state where if you are about to be put out in the street, we will pay your rent for 1 or 2 months, because it's a lot cheaper for the state to pay the rent of a family for a couple of months than it is to let them be thrown out and then try to find housing for them and have them go to the shelter and all that stuff. So it's just a sensible program. If you had a program like that at the federal government, it would cost a little more money, but it would save us a fortune. Secondly, 2/3 of the homeless either have a substance abuse program, a mental illness, or both. That's a much more difficult crowd. Here's what we do about that in our state, and we don't do it as successfully as we should, but at least we do it. Many of those people can help themselves if they have a little help. So we have set up single room occupancy type situations with staff 24 hours a day for social services. They can support a number of people who just need to be reminded to take their medications, helped a little bit in trying to get a job, or with SSI or whatever. That can be helped. Then we have a very hardcore group of people, and this is a very difficult issue, and it's a constitutional issue, who are either seriously impaired alcoholics or seriously mentally ill. They go to the state hospital, they take their meds because we can make them. They come out, after a while they stop taking their meds, and they relapse. And every time they relapse, it's a cycle that goes down and down and down. We pass a law which is very controversial because many believe it's an infringement on civil liberties. And it's one of those areas that's really tough. We pass a law that says we may medicate people without their consent or mandatory medication when they're out of the hospital. Now, here's the dilemma of this kind of a law, and it's being held up by the courts because the civil liberties are being debated. But is this a violation of civil liberties? It probably is, to medicate people against their consent. On the other hand, if we don't do it, they have a relapse, they go to the hospital, and every time they come out, they're a little worse off than they were, and it goes around and around and around. So it's a really tough issue, because if we medicate them against their consent, they do all right, but if we, and that may well be an infringement on civil liberties, if we don't medicate them against their consent, we know they're going to go down and down and down, and do they have the choice to do that? And that's a very, very difficult issue. We've got to have adequate funding, of course, but adequate funding is not enough for programs that don't work. One of the things that we did when I was governor is and I had a Republican Human Services Secretary who was incredibly helpful because he benchmarked human services. He gave us goals: reduction in teenage pregnancy, reduction in alcohol abuse, reduction in drug use, reduction in dropout rates, and we could measure every county against the money we were giving them in terms of what they were doing. And when the trends weren't the way they were supposed to be, we went in and looked. Why are these people not doing their jobs, or are they not getting enough money, or is there some extra factor? That's what we need to do with the homeless and with mental illness and substance abuse, which are all closely tied together. We've got to figure out what works, fund the programs that work, stop funding the programs that don't work. It can be done, but it's going to take a real serious commitment on the part of the United States government and the President of the United States to do it.
Former supervisor. Yes. For 3 years of my life, I lived just across the border from Vermont in Claremont, New Hampshire.
Would you like to go back there after you finish voting in the caucuses so you can vote in the New Hampshire primary?
Right across from Mount Ascutney. It was a beautiful, beautiful area. And I I'm going to express a concern which I know is controversial, but I think that you as a candidate probably will need to deal with it, and so I'm going to ask the question. Before I ask the question, I'm going to preface it by saying that I am not homophobic because I have many friends who are gay and lesbian over the years. But I want to ask you this question because I think that a nation's strength is developed from the strength of its families. And I'm deeply concerned about the trend that has been set in Vermont with reference to same-sex marriages. And I think that this is really an issue that is quite apart from civil rights. I think it is something that goes deeper than that. And I think that I would appreciate your comments because only as a family unit is strong will a nation remain strong. And I know that living as I did in New England, it used to be the bastion of some of the basic values that we prize. So you talked of the hemorrhaging of jobs, and I do not want to see the hemorrhaging of our basic values, and I hope you might address that.
I would be happy to. First of all, I would say in New England our values are in pretty great shape. We have health insurance for all our kids. We invest in homeless people and try to keep them off the streets the way I talked about. We invest in small children and their families in ways nobody else does. We balance budgets, which no Republican has done in 34 years in the presidency in this country. So I think our values are in pretty good shape in New England. Secondly, we don't have same-sex marriage in Vermont. Our bill says marriage is between a man and a woman, but same-sex couples may enter into a civil union and achieve all the same legal rights. And I think that's important. And let me tell you why I think this is important. Marriage is a complicated business because it's both religious and civil. It started out as only religious. We decided we would leave the marriage to the church, that we were not going to tell any church that they had to marry people that they thought they shouldn't marry. That is not the business of the state. That is the business of the church. But we also decided that everybody deserves exactly the same rights under the law. Hospital visitation, insurance, inheritance. There's a zillion legal rights that you can only get if you're married. Here's why I believe that. I believe that every single American deserves the same rights that I do. I said before, we were all in this together. When you run for president, you meet extraordinary people. There's no such thing as a boring American. And I've met some extraordinary people, and I'm going to tell you a story that happened to me about 8 months ago or so in Washington. I gave a speech. I've forgotten who the group is, and I forgot what the speech was about. But after I got down off the stage, a guy who's 80 years old came up to me. He said, "Governor, I'm 80 years old. I want to thank you for the civil unions bill." I was shocked. So I said, "Oh, thank you very much. Do you have someone in your family who's gay or lesbian?" He said, "No, Governor. I'm a veteran. I was on the beach in D-Day in Normandy. A lot of my friends were killed, and I'm gay." Now, there's a guy who did what all those people in the White House who never served a day in their life abroad talk about all the time. A guy who was willing to give his life for the United States of America, whose friends did die in the service of the United States of America, defending not only American freedoms but the freedoms of the Western world. If that guy doesn't deserve exactly the same rights that I have when he comes home, then this isn't the country I think it is, and I think this is a great country, and he's going to get those rights. That's going to be a tough issue in the campaign. But I think we've got to get beyond this. I really do. We need to be in this together. We need to leave no one behind. I told you